I grew up in South London. In fact, this is the view from my apartment. Those of you who are eagle-eyed will notice that this is Selhurst Park, the home of Crystal Palace Football Club. On May the 17th, 2025, they beat Manchester City at Wembley Stadium to win the FA Cup, the club's first major trophy. Winning the FA Cup allowed Crystal Palace to enter the Europa League for the first time in the club's history, exposing them to more sponsorship opportunities and more revenue. However, 2 weeks later, they were demoted from the Europa League to the Conference League because of this man. This man is John Textor. He is the CEO of Eagle Football Holdings. He owned 40% of Crystal Palace. He also owned Lyon in France. He also owns Botafogo in Brazil. And he has ownership of RWD Molenbeek in Belgium. Lyon qualified 6th in Liga, meaning they were eligible for the Europa League 2. UEFA rules state 2 clubs cannot be in the same European competition owned by the same entity or owner. So they demoted Crystal Palace, and that great day in Crystal Palace's history has become a nightmare. This is one of the many problems with multi-club ownership today. A trend which got popularized around a decade ago has ballooned in popularity, and many clubs and many fans are starting to feel the effects. A study conducted in 2024 showed that more than 350 football clubs around the world are part of multi-club ownership groups, and that number is ballooning in size year on year. I'm Jordan. I'm on a mission to make football fans like you just 1% more informed, and today, along with research from Lucas Novick, we're going to dive into MCO's multi-club ownership models. How this all began, what's going to happen to Crystal Palace, and more importantly, the pitfalls of multi-club ownership. We'll get back to Crystal Palace later, but before we do, I'm going to show you how prominent this is, because there's loads of groups out there. Some you're probably not even familiar with. Take David Blitzer, another American investor, more famous for co-founding the Harris Blitzer Sports and Entertainment Company. He also has a separate investment vehicle where he owns quite a few football clubs. It's called Global Football Holdings, and through it, he owns Estoril Praia in Portugal, AD Alcorcon in Spain, SK Beveren in Belgium, and ADO Den Haag in Holland. In Germany, he owns 45% of Augsburg, and in Denmark, he owns 50% of Brøndby. That's an American investor with holdings in several European clubs. 7-7 Partners are another one. We're going to hear more about them later, but at their peak, they held ownership stakes in quite a lot of global football teams. Standard Liège, Genoa, Vasco da Gama in Brazil, Sevilla, and Hertha Berlin. In addition, Pacific Media Group are another one. They own Barnsley, KV Oostende in Belgium, AS Nancy in France, Dutch club FC Den Bosch, Danish club FC Esbjerg, Swiss club FC Thun, and Polish side GKS Tichy. They are a few of the quieter operators. Then of course you have the headline makers. Red Bull are maybe one of the most famous ones. RB Leipzig, RB Salzburg, Red Bull Bragantino, New York Red Bulls, and now they own a minority in Paris FC. Considering Leipzig was only founded in 2009, what they've done with the Red Bull empire is fascinating. And then of course, you have the City Football Group. One of the very first videos I ever made on this channel was about them and their global dominance, because they own a lot of football clubs. At the top of the pyramid is Manchester City, of course. In Europe, they own Spain's Girona. They own Italy's Palermo. They own the French club Troyes. They also own Belgian's second-tier club Lommel SK. They hold a minority share in Japanese champions Yokorino Marinos. In South America, they own Uruguay's Montevideo City Torque and Brazilian giants Bahia. In Asia, they own a majority stake in Mumbai City FC. And in China, they have the Shenzhen Peng City Football Club. Don't forget Australia. They also own Melbourne City in Australia's A-League 2. The global footprint is insane. That's just a select few, by the way. There's more companies that own several clubs, and there's more families or individuals that own 2 or 3 clubs spotted around the world. My very own club are owned by Ineos, who also own more than one football club. Now, with all of these groups owning multiple clubs, the conflicts start to pile up. And that's how we get right back to Crystal Palace. When Lyon and Crystal Palace both qualified for the same European competition, UEFA applied Article 5. That rule bans any person or entity having any control or influence over 2 clubs in the same competition. In fact, I had to dig it out for you. It says the following. Control or influence can be defined as holding a majority of the shareholders' voting rights, having the right to appoint or remove the majority of the club's governing body members, being a shareholder who alone controls the majority of the club's voting rights, or being able to exercise by any means a decisive influence in the club's decision making. The wording is key here. It's not just about owning a stake in the club, it's about influence or control, and that is where UEFA felt that John Textor stepped over the line. Under the rule, when 2 clubs clash like this, the team with the highest domestic finish is the one that gets the favor. Lyon finished 6th in their league, Crystal Palace finished 12th in the Premier League, so Palace were the ones that got demoted. The reaction in South London was exactly what you'd expect. Palace argued they weren't part of a multi-club operation in any meaningful sense. Steve Parish is the biggest shareholder in Crystal Palace, and he argued that he runs the day-to-day operations with the team along with some other shareholders. John Textor does own 40% of the club, but he doesn't have any decisive influence over the team. In fact, John Textor was selling his shares in the club too. At the time of recording this video, he sold his share in Crystal Palace to other American business leaders, again highlighting the lack of decisive influence in the day-to-day operations at Crystal Palace. But UEFA's cutoff date is March the 1st of any given year. At the beginning of March, John Textor still owned his shares in Crystal Palace, so they rendered that a moot point. Even though the sale wiped away the connection with Textor, they still demoted Crystal Palace from the Europa League to the Conference League. Crystal Palace took this whole argument to the Court of Arbitration for Sport, and they rejected their claims. It's a brutal reminder that the fate of your club can be decided by another team, with another board and another set of priorities. Palace did everything right on the pitch, and they still got punished for it. And that is just one of the many pitfalls of multi-club ownership. Yes, I support Manchester United. They have my heart. But Crystal Palace have my home. And when I saw the disappointment of fans in my local area, I had to look into this further. And when I did, I realized there's many more. This multi-club ownership runs a lot deeper than what appears on the surface. One of the biggest pitfalls is the movement of players in between clubs. I write a newsletter, insights like this, breaking down the business of sport sent to your email inbox every Monday at 11 a.m. UK time. Join the thousands of you receiving the newsletter by entering your email in the link below. Now, the movement of players between MCO clubs is another minefield. On paper, shifting players in between MCO clubs makes sense. If a young talent isn't getting the game time at the top club, they could maybe be loaned or transferred to another club in the network to get some game time and some experience. But the reality is some of these moves are masked as development, but really it's more like financial engineering. Let's take Savinho. He was bought by Troyes, a French club in the City Football Group empire, for 6.5 million euros. He was then loaned out to Girona, having not played a single minute for Troyes. He had a fantastic season in Girona and then was bought by Manchester City for 25 million euros just a season later. On the surface, that looks like a talented winger joining Manchester City, but critics highlight that actually turns to be a 18 million euro profit for Troyes, having not even played a single minute for the club. This massively helps Troyes with their FFP situation in France, and of course the player stays within the CFG network the entire time. UEFA has started flagging this kind of thing. The latest rules state that if 3 or more players move amongst commonly owned teams in a season, that counts as decisive influence. Crystal Palace know a lot about that term. Then there is the feeder club problem. Smaller teams in the network can end up with no real ambition to compete because their best players get siphoned off to the team at the top of the pyramid. Strasbourg fans accused new owners Blueco, who also own Chelsea, into turning them into a satellite. In their first transfer window under Blueco, Strasbourg took in several Chelsea-owned players. Habib Diallo, Senegalese striker, the winger Angelo Gabriel as well. Fans claimed that these players were taken in to develop for Chelsea rather than to improve Strasbourg's long-term plans. They were mad. And you're going to see just how mad later on. The Pozzo family also owned Udinese and Watford. They used the pipeline constantly. In 2014-2015 Watford's promotion season, Udinese sent over several players. Mate Vidra, Valon Bayrami, Gabriel Angela, and even Uncle Odion Ighalo. All of these players arrived from Pozzo-owned clubs like Udinese or Pozzo-linked clubs Granada. Around that time, Alan Neom came, also Gabriel Tamas. These were players again from Udinese, and it just meant that Watford in the Premier League had players that had already played in a European top flight club. It was all within the rules, but it meant that other clubs that had just come from the Championship didn't have the exposure to top flight European club players that Watford did, without having to spend a lot of money. The bottom line is, in a multi-club ownership model, the transfer of players is not always about what's best for the player or what's best for the club that's selling. Sometimes it's about balancing the books or moving assets across the network where it makes the most financial sense. And this is where it gets murky for everyone. When your role in the network is to develop players for other teams' success, chasing promotion or chasing trophies stops becoming your reality. And that's when fans start to turn their back on the ownership. The resistance to multi-club ownership has been building steadily over the past few years. What started as isolated protests has started to branch out into a more recurring theme in some leagues. In 2021, Strasbourg fans, they're big mad at this whole thing. They were voicing their concerns at the prospect of Blueco buying Strasbourg as they didn't want to turn them into a feeder club for Chelsea. In 2022, again in France, AS Nancy fans stormed the pitch in protest in a Ligue 2 match against Quevilly-Rouen. Their club, under the Pacific Media Group ownership, which I mentioned earlier, were demoted to the third tier of French football for the first time in their history after a series of cost-cutting measures and getting rid of great players. 2023, Strasbourg fans were back. They staged a coordinated banner protest against Blueco, accusing them of prioritizing Chelsea's ambitions over theirs. That same year, Standard Liège fans got very vocal against their owners, 777 Partners, after a series of transfer embargoes and delayed payments really stifled the growth of their club. That reached fever pitch in 2024. The fans blocked the team bus from getting to the stadium ahead of a match against Westerlo, forcing the game to be postponed. Months of financial instability and broken promises, the fans had enough. We're not finished though. Botafogo fans, same year, unfurled a giant banner saying, "We are not satellites." Even though they won the league in Brazil, Botafogo fans accused John Textor of favouring Lyon's ambitions over theirs. And then of course now, in 2025, Palace fans are now super vocal about being demoted from the Europa League to the Conference League following John Textor's multi-club ownership model. I love football, but the AS Nancy and the Standard Liège stuff just doesn't sit right with my heart. When I saw the video of them blocking the bus from getting to the stadium, I had to look deeper into the Standard Liège. 777 Partners were the ones that owned them at the time. They faced repeated scrutiny of how they operate the club from an accounting level. The Belgian FA imposed 3 separate transfer embargoes on Standard Liège across 2023 and 2024 for failing to meet financial criteria. Payments to creditors and players were delayed, and some analysts earmarked that some funds that were meant to be for those people were sent to other areas of the network. Then, analysts in Belgium noted that a small spike in commercial income for Standard Liège in 2023 was linked to a sponsorship deal for Standard Liège linked to another 777 affiliated company. The details of who were never revealed publicly, but again, it exposes the need for transparency in these MCO multi-club ownership models. It doesn't stop there though. Some records in Belgium show that the future broadcast income for Standard Liège was used as collateral in a loan taken out by 77 Partners to help Genoa. And this is where the business of sport gets really, really great. If 777 Partners cannot meet those financial obligations, Genoa are in a bad way, Standard Liège are in a bad way, no one wins. For fans, a club can look solvent on paper, but beneath the surface could be on the precipice of collapse. And when it's an MCO, if the entire group is under pressure, then everyone in the network is at risk. That's a scary prospect. Now, there are some ways in which I think the MCO model can improve, and I've got 3 ways for you, and I'm going to tell you about them in just a moment. But there is one MCO model that we haven't discussed yet, the PIF. In Saudi Arabia, the PIF, the Public Investment Fund, own 4 of the biggest teams in the country. That is pretty insane to me. It would be like the British government owning the top 6 clubs in the Premier League all together at the same time, which of course would just never happen. How that happened and the implications of that are featured in the Saudi series, coming very soon. I am doing an entire series breaking down how Saudi Arabia have targeted sport for global domination. There's going to be multiple episodes, 1 episode per sport. Enter your email address in the link below for early access. Some of the messages I get in anticipation are fantastic. Now, if football wants to keep the benefits of multi-club ownership without the chaos, then the rules need to catch up. I have 3 suggestions. The first is the decisive influence wording. UEFA's Article 5 points to decisive influence. That wording needs to be firmer. Clubs need to understand what that means. Palace clearly thought that they weren't breaking the rules. UEFA thought that they were. We can't have that conjecture going forward anymore. My second suggested change is about transparency. Anytime a club changes players, loans players, signs a sponsorship deal with an associated party relative to the owner, that should be made public. Independent market value assessments, and clear disclosure of those related parties. No more mysterious sponsorship deals, no more inflated transfer fees for players within the same network. You can do it, but you have to justify why you're doing it in a public manner. I don't think that's too much to ask for. The final one is a bit more extreme, but I don't think it should be possible for a multi-club ownership group to even possibly end up with 2 clubs in the same European competition. If you buy a club in Europe, you can only own 1. It's all good the City Football Group owning Man City and owning Troyes, because Troyes have never really been good enough to get to a European football competition. But imagine if Troyes had a Leicester season and won the league. and Man City finished third. Would Man City get demoted from the Champions League to the Europa League because Troyes had a higher domestic finish? That's insane. It shouldn't even get to that point. So my suggestion is, if you want to run an MCO model, you can only own one club in each continent. You have to be very particular about who you want to invest in. You only get one. If the club is Man City, fine, sure. You can now not own another club in UEFA's entire district. You can own New York Red Bulls, but then you can't own another club in the States. You can own Melbourne City, but then you can't own another club in Australia. It's really simple. You can potentially own 7 or 8 clubs around the world, but there's never going to be any overlap. That's fantastic for the future, and you can set a firm date. The 1st of January 2027, if you have multiple clubs that breach that rule, you got to sell them. That way, fans, like Crystal Palace fans, aren't going to go through what they went through in the summer of 2025. You're not going to have interesting accountancy practices like Ineos had with Manchester United and Nice. And you're not going to have a situation where the Saudi PIF owns 4 of the biggest clubs in the entire league. I'm not saying MCO should go away. I'm not saying that at all. But at some point, we have to protect the integrity of our competition, and we have to do more to keep the fans' trust. Football is a global business right now, but it's for the fans. And when the fans become an afterthought, the game loses. I'm Jordan. I'm enjoying putting this together. If you want to see another problem that the Premier League has in particular, click this video right here. But I did mention City Football Group a lot in this video. One of the first videos I ever made was on them and their global domination. Click right here to watch one of my earlier videos on this channel. As always, thank you for watching.